Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining our eSeminar today on setting up security in XLTech, NeuroWorks, and SleepWorks software using XLSecurity. My name is Franco Volio, and I am the Sleep and Neurology Education Manager with Natus Medical. I will be your host and presenter today. Today's presentation applies or is applicable to versions 6.0, 6.1, 6.3 up to 7.0. Today's session is not intended to be a definitive guide or explanation of the security framework in NeuroWorks SleepWorks software. It is intended to provide you with an introduction to the XLSecurity software and what it's all about and what it's designed to address. And it's also designed to provide you with some instructions to start using it as well. So I want to start off by providing you with just an outline of the topics I'll be covering today. So first off, I'll be providing you with a little introduction to XLSecurity. Then we'll talk about installation of XLSecurity. We'll then review a sample configuration, otherwise known as secure access with role-based credentials. This will make more sense as we move along in the presentation. I'll talk to you about an audit log, which is basically a transaction record indicating the activities that took place on a particular machine. And then I will also talk about the Launchpad, which is another component of XLSecurity. Alright, so I want to start off by asking you, have you considered what would happen if someone who is not part of your staff is walking by and happens to get a look or a view of the screen that you're working on that displays a patient medical record? How do you deal with that? Have you thought about the possibility of someone walking by and possibly even manipulating a patient record? So if you've got a patient file or patient record open in the database, could someone simply go in there and change some information? Have you considered the possibility of someone accidentally deleting a study file while their database is open? And have you considered the consequences of unauthorized, let's say, computer activity or software activity on your machine that we call a medical device? And by that I mean whether we're talking about someone installing a program that is not appropriate for the machine. For example, someone installs a game application or any other type of software program that has not been approved or tested by Natus. Consider the consequences of all of these. You could be paying a price, and a pretty high price, if any of these situations, if you're dealing with any of these situations. The Natus XLTech software has considered the consequences of such actions, and the result of this discussion is XLSecurity. XLSecurity is designed to provide the end user, your entire site, with protection of data. It's designed to make people and end users more accountable for their actions while they are interacting with the software. And it's also designed to maintain the integrity of the data, preventing it from any kind of manipulation from outside or non-approved users. All of these principles, by the way, are encompassed in what is otherwise known as HIPAA, which stands for Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. It seems to make sense that even if you aren't required to comply to HIPAA, that you would still be interested in protecting your data and holding people in your lab accountable for the information that is entered. We often get asked, is your software HIPAA compliant? And what we generally say to that, it's not that the software is HIPAA compliant. We provide you with the tools. It is up to you, the end user, to utilize the tools that we provide to make your lab HIPAA compliant. Or again, if you don't necessarily care about HIPAA compliance, it is up to you, the end user, to implement measures that will help you protect your data, maintain the privacy, and to hold people accountable. When it comes to implementing the security framework in your system, XLSecurity is basically a software program which consists of several components and services. The program provides you with login management. It allows you to lock down your computer. It allows you to configure what people can and cannot do with your system. This type of function is generally reserved for your laboratory or your site's IT administrator, and that administrator could be the lab manager. It could be a chief technician or technologist. So generally speaking, there's one person, that is one or two people, that are assigned to this role and implementing it, maintaining it, and just making sure that, again, that it is the XLSecurity framework is running on all machines. When you install NeuroWorks or SleepWorks software, the XLSecurity components are installed as part of that installation package. If you're on a machine that has NeuroWorks or SleepWorks installed, if you were to go to Start, Programs, XLTech, you'll see that there are several components that are installed. One of the areas, or one of the components installed, is Security. Under the Security option, you'll see three programs there, mini programs or mini modules if you want to call them that. And this is installed on your computer automatically. Again, we install and provide you with the tool. Whether or not you are using the tool is up to you and is your responsibility. So I want to go through what these three modules here are all about and what they allow you to do. So first off, I just want to speak in abstract terms here. The premise behind XLSecurity is that you basically create a set of rules by which people must obey and comply when they are interacting on the computer. So these rules, these security rules and guidelines, are stored in a central database. So basically, let's look at the one example here. One example here, I've got a server in the middle, and we've got 8 workstations. Alright, so 8 workstations. These could be 8 acquisition machines, they could be review stations, they could be laptops, they could be portable machines or carts. In this environment, in an environment where you have a server, it is common that the server is designated as the location where all of the security rules and guidelines are to be stored. We call this the setting server, or the central XLSecurity database. So in this type of scenario, and again, if you are interacting with the server, this is likely your setup unless you changed it or someone changed it for some reason. But in this environment or this setup, your rules relating to security are stored on the server. Each computer also contains a database storing these security rules. However, each computer, what it does, it basically communicates with the central XLSecurity database and compares its security rules with the rules of the server. So there's an interaction that takes place between the computer and the server on a regular basis, where basically each machine is comparing to make sure that either machine has the latest rules and guidelines that govern how a user should be interacting with the system. Another scenario is where you don't have a server. So in this scenario, we've got 4 computers. Alright, so you don't need a server to implement XLSecurity. In this type of an environment where you've got, let's say, 4 workstations, you can designate one machine to be the central XLSecurity database. So in this case here, we've designated this top machine. This machine is designated or stores all of the latest rules and guidelines relating to security. The other computers then will interact with this computer to make sure that each computer always has the latest security information. Now, how often do the computers communicate with each other? So basically, every time a user logs onto the system, there is a synchronization process that occurs between the computer and wherever the central XLSecurity database is stored. So whether it's a server or just another machine, there is an interaction that takes place every time a user logs on. Alright, it's not something that is set up to just constantly run in the background every 5 minutes. It's scanning. Once you log on to a session, in the session that you are logged on, basically it will maintain or abide by the rules that it has in its storage or in its database at the time that you initially logged in. Now let's just look at a scenario here where, let's say you've got a portable machine, or if it's not a portable machine, let's say one of your computers is basically severed from the network. So if this computer down here loses its connection with the central XLSecurity database, basically the last time security rules were updated on the bottom machine, it will continue to use those rules until there is a connection. So it is not the case where if you lose your connection to the central security database that the machine will not be able to function. The machine can still function even if it doesn't have a connection to the XLSecurity database. The risk that you run is that the computer may not have the latest rules that have been implemented and that are stored on the central security database. The same goes in the server environment. So if you're interacting with the server, same sort of scenario. So if one computer loses its connection with the central security database, the computer that lost its connection will continue to operate using the security rules that are stored on its database. Once it reconnects and someone logs in, the machines or the databases will synchronize the rules with each other. Alright, so let's talk about the methodology that XLSecurity employs to provide you with the protection, the privacy, the accountability that we talked about, and the data integrity. So how does it do this? It's able to provide these benefits by utilizing a login management system. Alright, so it provides you with the ability to, first of all, create individual user logins. And by logins, all of you should be familiar with what a login is. And that's basically you're typing in a username and you have a password that is assigned to you or that you personally create. The XLSecurity provides you with the ability to deal with an inactive machine. And by that I mean if you are on the computer and you're typing some information in, and then for whatever reason you have to leave the room. So if you leave the room and let's say you're gone for 20 minutes or half an hour, what happens to your computer? Does your computer screen, does it still maintain the state that it had previously, displaying perhaps you're in the middle of typing something in a patient medical record? Should that medical record still be in display after 10 minutes, 15 minutes? With XLSecurity, you can set up rules to manage what we call inactivity. So for example, after 15 minutes, you can have the computer automatically go into a Screensaver mode. And in the Screensaver mode, it basically obscures the view from your monitor so that if anyone is walking by who's not authorized comes in, they cannot see what is on screen. In order for them to be able to view what's on screen, they will need to log in. And of course, if they don't have the necessary credentials or a login for that particular machine, they will not be able to log in and see what's on the computer. We provide authentication services. And with authentication services, by that I mean we can go down, we can actually develop permissions and provide people specific users. We can say, let's allow these types of users. Alright, let's say technologists. So if we create a group called technologists, any technologist should be able to acquire or record a study, open a study in review. Alright, however, we don't want them to have the ability to purge or archive a study. We'd like to maintain that function for a different person in our staff. So with authentication services, again, what I mean by that is basically allowing or denying users access to parts of the system's functionality based on the permissions that you create. The fourth method that is employed is the use of auditing services. And when we talk about auditing services, what this basically is tracking the user's interaction with a machine and recording the key functions that is performed by the user in a log file that we call an audit log. Alright, an audit log, you can call it a transaction log. And so if you want to go back in time and find out what a particular user was doing when they were logged on a particular machine, the Audit Services provides you with the ability to look at a report that basically maintains a log of specific functions that are performed by that user. It doesn't track every single move in the software, but there are some major functions or operations that the Audit Services keeps track of. What I want to do next is I want to share my desktop, and I want to walk you through an example of how the XLSecurity can be implemented on a particular machine. So there are several schemes that you can employ, and I'll talk about the schemes later. But basically, what I want to demonstrate to you now is how I can employ or utilize these methods here. How I'm going to use these methods to implement a security system on my laptop here. All right, so I'm just going to share my desktop. And here I am at the database. Okay, so right now I'm just going to go to the Start button. I have XLSecurity enabled right now, so I do have some degree of security enabled right now. I'm not going to go into installing the security, how this gets installed, because this gets installed during the beginning. But I want to go into, I'm assuming that most of you that are on the call already have the software installed. So if you go to the Start button, you may find an option that says Launchpad. If you don't have the Launchpad option, which basically brings up a window containing a number of login boxes here, and it also displays a number of icons that allow you to open up a particular program. If you don't have this, you can also go to Start Programs, XLTech Security. Alright, so what I want to do first is go into the Security Configurator. Alright, so here we are at the Security Configurator screen, and I mentioned just a minute ago, I talked about the idea of creating individual user logins. Alright, so I want to walk you through this screen here, and this should become more clear to you as we go through this. So in the first screen here, the first tab, basically it is reserved for user information. Alright, so I've already inputted a number of users in my Users tab here, just for the sake of the presentation. But let's create another user. So I'm going to click on Add, and I'm going to create a new user. So let's say we've got a new technician just joined us, and I'm going to create a username. So the username will be the name that they use when they're prompted at the login screen. So I will say, let's say I'll use first initial, last name, J Montana. Full name is Joe Montana. Alright, next I'm going to create a password. I'm going to type it in again. Now I have the option here, because I am acting as the administrator right now. Okay, I'm the labs administrator. I have to create the username in the first place. So I'm the one that's created this Joe Montana's password right now. But if I want Joe to be able to create his own password, then I want to make sure that this checkbox is checked. Okay? Because if I know Joe Montana's password, he could blame me later for saying, no, it wasn't him that did something, it was me. I just know his password. So again, to preserve the uniqueness and protection and privacy of data, I want to keep this box checked so that the next time Joe Montana logs on, he will be prompted to change his login. If you want, you can type in a description. Technologist started November 16th. And I will click OK. Alright, so there's Joe Montana. And again, if you go into each of these users and you click on properties, we can see that they've got their username, their full name, they've got the password. It doesn't tell us what the password is. If a user forgets his or her password, you need to go back in here and create a new user. And then again, you can just check the box that prompts the user to change it the next time. Okay, so I've got a list of users in here right now. So when you think about creating permissions for users, you may think about it in possibly one of two ways. The first way, one way to do this, if we were just thinking logically, is I could just select a user. So I could take Joe Montana and I could look for some type of a configuration screen that says, let's allow Joe to have access to the review window. Let's give Joe access to making changes to a system setting. Let's give Joe access to recording a study. But let's deny him the permission to purge a study or to delete a study or perhaps even to copy a study. We don't want studies leaving the lab. So if I created these rules individually for Joe Montana, let's look at the number of users we've got here. We've probably got about 1, 2, 3, it's about 15 or so users here. Imagine if you had 30 users or 40 users or 50 users. All right. So one way, if we're just thinking about this logically, is that we could go into each person's profile and possibly create individual rules for all of them. All right. So again, we're just talking theoretically and logically how one might approach creating permissions for a user. The other way, which is the way that the Natus security works, is rather than creating an individual profile for each individual user, so if we had 50 users, rather than creating this individual profile for 50 users, let's develop or create some groups of users. All right, so now by default these groups, I'm calling them groups, but in the security framework we call them roles. All right, so by default, your system comes with 5 roles. We have an administrator role, we have a doctor role, we have an everyone role, we have a technologist role, and we have a vendor role. You cannot delete these roles. All right, these are there by default. So again, we're not, rather than creating individual profiles for each of the 50 users that we have, we're going to create a profile for each group. And then let's just put the users into groups. So rather than creating the profile 50 times, if we decide to utilize, let's say, these 5 groups, we only have to create the profile for 5 groups. So let's look at these profiles then. Let's look at the administrator profile. So I'm going to click on administrator and I'm going to click on the properties button. So basically in this window here, it lists all of the activities that can be denied to a user and all of the activities that can be enabled or allowed for a user. So because this is the administrator or the administrative role, you will see a check mark next to all of the functions, because generally speaking we define an administrator as someone that has full access to all of the system functions. All right, so these are all the activities or the functions that you can allow or deny to a user. For more information about what these functions respond to, is if you put your mouse pointer over top of each of them, there's a tooltip and provides you with a general or a brief description of what the activity or the function allows you to do. Okay, so the administrative role is able to access and basically perform all operations within the database or within the software. So I'm going to click OK. Let's think about a doctor now. Think about the doctor in your lab. What roles or what functions do you want your doctor to have access to? So I'm going to click on properties. So by default, all of these roles, everyone has access to everything by default. So again, it's up to you or the administrator to go in and to modify these roles so that, again, if you're interested in maintaining the protection, the privacy, accountability, and data integrity, if you want to utilize these tools, you need to go in and modify these accordingly. And again, if you want to become HIPAA compliant, you need to utilize these tools. So let's think about the example of a doctor. what activities or functions do you want your doctor? You can look at this and say, what do we want to allow them? Well, they're allowed to do everything right now. So let's ask, what do we want to prohibit them from doing? So I don't want the doctor, because I'm the administrator of the lab, and I want to keep control over who can delete studies, for example. All right, and this is and I'm picking on this particular example because it's a big one. Because we've had calls before where people call and contact us and say, I'm missing a study. And sometimes the results of our investigation show that the study was actually deleted. The lab then is presented with a scenario where they are saying, okay, well, I didn't delete it. Well, who deleted it? All right. So we go into the audit log that keeps a record of user activities. And sometimes what we've seen is that everyone is logging onto the system as administrator. Okay, so everyone has full access to the system. All right, that's one scenario. When you have that scenario, you can't identify who the administrator is because everyone's using administrator as the login. So you can't really, trace it back to which user actually deleted the study. The other scenario is the same goes for copying studies. If you are interested in making sure that studies do not leave your lab, you want to prohibit people from doing that. Now, if you're really looking to drill down and keep certain functions permissible for maybe even one individual, you can. So it's possible. For example, you can prohibit everyone from doing any type of deleting, copying, or exporting by restricting everyone from being able to do those activities and only allowing, let's say, one person to do it. When you shrink it down to one person, it's a lot easier to trace back who was responsible for performing a certain activity relating to the study file. So, back to the example. In the doctor role, I don't want our doctors, let's say, to be able to have the ability to delete a study. So I'm just going to left click on it. I don't want studies leaving our lab without my permission because I'm the administrator. I've been given the responsibility to make sure that, again, data is protected. So I'm going to prevent the doctors from being able to export. I don't want someone to be able to import studies into our system without my knowledge, so I'm going to check that. I don't want people to be able to purge a study. I don't want people to be able to move a study or to merge studies again. Alright, so we can continue to, again, just to prohibit what we want the doctors to be able to do. Selecting database alias, this allows them to change databases, that's fine. We want them to have access to the patient medical record. If you are fine with doctors having the access to manage an ambulatory study, managing report templates, maybe you don't want them changing the reports because we don't want people complaining later saying, who changed the reports? So I'm going to prohibit them from doing that. And there are also some utility applications, some applications that allow you to troubleshoot some of the issues with any issue that you might have with the system. You can prevent them from doing that as well if you like, and you can just check that box. So we've defined what this role is for the doctor. Let's click OK. Now we've created this group. Now the next thing that we can do is basically say, okay, who should belong to the doctor group? Alright, so you can do that from within this window here, or you can go back to the users tab here. And by default, by the way, when you create a new user, it automatically just assigns them the everyone role. So I'm going to go down here where it says Joe Montana has the role of everyone. If you look at the role of everyone, like I said, by default they're allowed to do everything. Alright, so I don't want that to be the case. So I'm going to go to Joe Montana and just remove that role by clicking on the left clicking on this button here. Alright. So let's go through each user then. Let's look for our doctor. So there's a doctor here, Dr. Deborah Smith. I want her to have the doctor role, so I'm going to left click on doctor and click on the left arrow button. Let's go to look at the other doctors here. Dr. Henderson is has the doctor role. And do we have any other doctors? Dr. Rick Paul. Going to assign him to the doctor group. Okay. So let's go back to our roles, and if you left click on doctor, you'll see that in this window it displays all of the users that have this role. Alright, so the Roles tab and the Users tab are basically two different ways to view and see who has what permission. Let's continue with the Everyone role. Alright, I'm going to look at this, and right now everyone's allowed to do everything here, so I'm just going to leave that one. And the Technologist role. Let's look at the properties of a Technologist. So the Technologist, I want them to be able to do everything except for, I don't want them to be able to do anything with data management. There we go. I left clicked on it now, and it applied to the whole category. So I don't want them to have the ability to do anything with the data files. And what else? If I check this button here, configuring system settings, this will prevent them from going into a preset or predefined montage, for example, and it won't give them the ability to modify the preset montage. So I'll just check that so we can just see the results of this in a moment. So let's check that, and let's see, can they do everything else? Can they report? I don't want them to be able to manage report templates. Ambulatory studies, I'm going to check that one as well. If we have an ambulatory amplifier, I don't want them to have the ability to clear the memory, for example, on the Trex, or sorry, on the amplifier, on the ambulatory amplifier. So we'll click OK. The vendor role is basically generally reserved for Natus or for an XLTech support person. Now, in this role, generally speaking, they are given permission to do everything. Now, if you wanted to deny that, you can do that and do that in here. I don't want to say not to do it, but it just means when the vendor, if you contact technical support, sometimes they need full access to the system. So if you want to deny by default access to a vendor such as Natus or XLTech, that's fine. Just keep in mind that in the event of a technical support call, you may be asked to provide administrative rights to the system. So right now I've got the roles that I'm interested in are primarily the administrator, the doctor, and the technologist. I'm going to create a role. Alright, so if you want, you can create additional roles. So technologist basically refers to whether they're my EEG or sleep recording technicians and also my review technicians. If you wanted, you could create different roles and call one a recording technician, another one a reviewing technician. I'm going to create a new role here, and I'm going to call it, let's just say, trainee. Alright, so we got a new person coming in, and I only want them, they just started, I don't want them to be able to do very much except for review a study and navigate about the database, because I want them, they're getting trained on interpreting or reading a study, and so I'm only going to give them the ability to review a study, to open a study and review, and to be able to navigate and select studies from within the database. So I'll click OK. Alright, so I've created a role. So let's say the trainee. Well, Joe Montana just started, so I'm going to give Joe Montana the trainee role. So I'm going to left click on Joe Montana, click on the left arrow button, and now he's considered a trainee. The technologist, then, I will apply that to the rest of my group. Oh, Deborah Smith is the doctor, Henderson's a doctor. Let's say Jimmy Fallon is a technician. Jay Leno's a technician. Michael George is a technician. Mary Lamb, Wayne Newton. Alright, and where's Joe Block? I'm going to move Joe Block. Let's say Joe Block is my administrator. So I already set this up. So I made Joe Block the administrator of the lab. So he's the one person that has access to everything. And Joe Block, if you recall from the roles, Joe Block is the only one that has the ability to archive, delete, and purge a study. So again, for traceability, for accountability, makes it a lot easier for me to trace back what happened to a study if there are any issues. Okay, so we've entered our users, we've defined the groups or the roles, we've assigned a group or a role to all of our users. Alright, so if you click on each user, it will tell you down here what role they have. We've defined the roles. Let's click Apply. Let's click OK. And let's demonstrate. So let's go into Launchpad and let's switch users. So I'm logged on as the administrator right now, but let's change it to J Montana, for example. Password. Alright, we're prompted for a message that says the password for this account has expired. You will not be able to access this account until you change your password. So do you recall when we set up the user, we had that checkbox that said users must change password the first time. So that's why we're getting this message. So I'm going to click yes. I'm going to type in my new password, one that my administrator does not know, and click on change. Alright, it's been successfully changed. So now we are logged on as Joe Montana. Alright. And when you log on as Joe Montana, you can see the security restrictions already taking place. So for example, if you look in our Launchpad, and the Launchpad, by the way, is basically where it indicates what applications you can start. So you can only open up the Natus database. So Joe can't do anything else. So if Joe tried to create a new study, for example, he'll receive a message saying he's been denied. If Joe turned out to be a devious employee and wanted to start deleting studies or purging studies, he would be faced with this message. Alright, so we can see how these permissions are denied to Joe. But if Joe wants to review the study will open in review. If Joe tried to make a change to any of the settings, again he is faced with a message. Alright? Now, this restriction that you're seeing right now, where you can't go into the settings menu, this corresponds to that setting that says configuring system options. So if you were a technician, you would not have access to the settings menu. Alright, so let's close this. And let's switch users now. Let's go back to the Launchpad. And this time, let's log on as Craig Ferguson. Alright, and let's have a look at the Launchpad again. You'll see in the Launchpad that Craig Ferguson has access to a lot more programs. Okay, now you can restrict these programs even further, and we'll talk about that in a moment when we talk about the Launchpad. Alright, but let's go and look at let's see what Craig Ferguson can and cannot do. So again, can Craig purge a study? No. Can Craig start a new study? Yes, he can. Let's cancel that. Let's go into review. Can Craig go into the settings menu? No, he cannot. Alright, so this was the technologist role. Now, this setting, if you're really bent on preventing your technologists from being able to make changes to a predefined montage, you can implement this setting. They can still change montages. If I right-click on it, I can still change the montage. Okay? You can still change your sensitivities. You can still change your filter settings. You just can't make changes to the actual template montage or the montage, the original montage. So this is one way to kind of introduce some protection against changes in your montage. Alright, keep in mind though, in this mode, if you wanted to re-reference, you cannot do this because you need access to the Edit Settings page. If you find that users need to re-reference and if the re-reference is a common derivation that you're used to changing to, one suggestion is to create more than one montage. So rather than the user having to manually create the montage and re-reference, you could simply create a number of montage options that are available for the technician or the end user to switch from. Okay, so let's close that. Let's go back to our Launchpad. I want to make changes. I want to go back into the security configurator, so I'm going to log on as administrator. But Joe Black is our labs administrator who has the administrator role, so I'm going to log in as Joe Black this time and type in his password. Let's go to Start. Let's go to Launchpad. Let's go back to the security configurator. Let's just look at a few other tabs. Let's look at the lockdown policy. So by default, let's look at the factory default and let's look at the properties here. This is where we're talking about managing inactivity. So by default, there's a factory default that basically locks the computer on inactivity. So after 15 minutes, a screensaver will show up on your screen that locks the user out. And if you want to go back on the screen, you need to log back in. If you wanted to change this or create a different policy, what you can do is you can click on, so I did one up here. Let's click Add, and I'm going to create a policy, let's say for the ICU. In the ICU, I don't want the computer to go into any kind of a lockdown or screensaver mode, at least not for, let's say, 45 minutes. Alright, so I can change that there, and I can click OK. Let's say in the surgical room, I just don't want the computer to be locked down at all. If I'm using the digital switch matrix and I'm doing stimulation on the brain, I don't want my screen to enter into a screensaver mode when I'm in surgery. So I'll click OK, uncheck the lock computer on inactivity, and click OK. So what we've done here is basically created several lockdown policies. Alright, now let's go to the computers. So the default lockdown policy, if I want, I can specify any one of these policies to apply to all machines. So right now, by default, it's the factory default, and that means after 15 minutes, all computers will go into a screensaver mode. So if I want, I can just simply select and utilize this one policy, and that would apply to all machines. If, however, I want to apply the lockdown policy to a specific machine, alright, I can do that by going up here and saying Add. And let's say we've got a computer in our ICU, and that computer name is called ICU Machine 22. So on that specific computer, I do not want to use the default lockdown policy. Instead, I want to use the ICU lockdown policy that I created. So I click OK, and I add that to my rules window. Let's say there's another computer that's in our surgical room, and that computer name is called Surgery 55. And for that one, I want to utilize my surgery lockdown policy. Click OK. So what you're doing here is basically exempting specific machines from the default lockdown policy, which is the factory default. Okay? And of course, to apply your changes, you need to click the Apply button. Let's go to Account Policy. Account Policy provides you with a few more options to control or govern your passwords. So if you want, you can set a policy where the password never expires. But if you want force people to change their password every 2 weeks, even if you wanted, you could just reduce the number here. Same thing with the password. You can permit a blank password whether or not you want to, or you can specify that it needs to be so many characters. And of course, you can also enforce a complex password policy where it forces the user to utilize a mixture of alphanumeric characters. The account lockout, basically, do you want to implement a rule that if someone fails to log in after 3 attempts, do you want to lock them out? And locking them out means that they will not be able to log into the system if they, let's say in this example, if they were unable to log in after 3 times. In this case, they would have to contact the administrator of the lab and say, "Hey, I'm locked out. Can you help me out?" The administrator would then go in and remove the lockout and set up a new password for the user. You can implement a lockout policy after failed attempts or even after days of inactivity. I want to talk about configurations. There are several configuration schemes schemes whereby you can have XLSecurity operate in a very specific way. So first of all, one scheme is if you decide to use, let's say it's just a personal computer, it's just one computer, and it's just yourself, then maybe you're not so interested in implementing a security framework. It becomes more important usually when you treat the machine as a medical device. So what you just saw in my example, the scenario that I had implemented was basically this one here. So we had secure access with role-based credentials. Alright, that is, you had to log in, and depending on the role that the user had, they were prohibited from doing certain functions, and they were allowed to do others. That's what you saw. If you noticed, I was able to go to the Start button, and I could access the menu on my Start button. Because when you pick this mode here, you also have 2 options. You can decide whether or not you want to have the desktop and the Start button accessible or not. So in my case, in the example that you saw, we had the desktop and Start button accessible. There is an option to have secure access with role-based credentials and not have the Start button and the desktop accessible. So let me show you how we did that. So when you go into our Launchpad, we went into Security Configurator. If you double click on Local Security Setup, you'll then come to this screen here where you're presented with a wizard. If we click the Continue button, it prompts us to make a selection. Is the computer for my personal use, or is this to be used as a medical instrument? In our example, we had specified, in the example that you saw today, it was specified as a medical device, medical instrument. So, if you look back to my diagram here, alright, you'll see the 4 options that are available. So one option is disable the security framework on this computer completely. Alright? If you selected this option, it's mostly the same as if you were to pick this is my personal computer. There's a small difference, and the difference has to do with the Windows login information, how the system auto recovers. The second option is allow secure access, so people have to log in still. However, you do not want to enforce role-based credentials. That's this one option here. And even when you select this, you have the option to specify whether or not you want to make the desktop and Start button accessible. What you saw was this mode here. Enable secure access with role-based credentials, which is probably one of the most popular ones. Now, once we make that selection, you're prompted to the next screen that basically says, do you want to allow users to have access to the desktop and Start menu? Yes or no? If no, you can click on Restrict. When you allow them access, basically, you still have to log in, but as you can see, you have access to the Start button. There's the Launchpad. Alright, there are your menu items. You can see I've got Microsoft Office installed on the computer. So you have access to these programs, but in addition to having access to the desktop and Start, you're still enforcing what a user can and cannot do. If you selected Restrict access to the computer's desktop and Start menu, your screen would look like this. Alright, so if I went to the Start button, you wouldn't have access to programs or anything else that you typically used to seeing under the Start menu. You click on Start, you can't do, this is empty. You can't do anything except to click on the Launchpad. then within the Launchpad you can launch the applications that are present in this window. Okay, so let me take a moment to go to the Launchpad. I'm going to share my desktop. If you have an application that is important, that you want users to be able to launch from within the Launchpad, this is where we go to the Launchpad setup. So I'm going to talk about a sleep lab, for example. I'm thinking about a CPAP device. Okay, it doesn't have to be sleep. Even if you're an EEG technician, you might have an application, the hospital's medical record database system, or some other program that you're using. So I'm going to go to Launchpad setup, and basically here's where you can specify what programs you want to be able to make available in the launch screen. So I'm going to click on the Add button, and I'm going to browse to see program files, and I happen to have a Respironics CPAP machine, and the software that controls it is called PC Direct. So I need to locate the exe file, click the Open button. I can give it a description. I'll say this is my CPAP controller. And what category would this fall under? And if you recognize these categories, these correspond to the main categories in our permissions window where we define the roles. So I would consider this a primary instrument. I'm going to click OK. Alright, click Apply, and we'll see that it's down here. Click Close. So that now, if I'm logging on as a technician, all right, right now I have administrative role, so as Joe Black, I'll see that software is located down here. If I were to switch user and log on as a technologist, you'll see that the CPAP controller is accessible. So if I double click on it, it opens up my device. All right, so that type of, you want to use the Launchpad setup if you want to control specifically what applications you want users to have access to. And again, it's a cleaner look, and you can really control what users have access to. The other option we talked about originally was this computer is for my personal use. And if you select this option, the next window is basically, okay, you have successfully configured local security policies, and the security component services are basically disabled because this is considered a personal machine. The fourth option, or scheme, is enabling secure access under a Windows account. Okay, so, and that's this one right here. If you decide that you do not want to use the XLSecurity framework or login screen, instead you want to continue using a Windows login, but you want the security features that are in XLSecurity, you have that option. And that option is the fourth one here, where it says enable secure access under a Windows account. Now this, incidentally, if you select this option, this is also the option that you would select if you are setting up a Citrix presentation server, or a Citrix server, sorry. So if you select the fourth option, then rather than having to log on through the Launchpad, this screen here, when you turn your computer off and on, you'll see your Windows login. So you'll be logging on to your Windows. Once you log on to your Windows, you will not have to log on to XLSecurity again. However, the roles, the user permissions, the users and roles that you've defined, all those conditions will apply even though you're not logging under XLSecurity. You've logged under Windows, but you're still kind of it's kind of the, I don't want to say the best of both worlds necessarily, but you get the ability or the option to utilize some of the services or some of the protection that is available in XLSecurity. Now, when you select enabling the Windows Secure option, or sorry, logging under Windows, you do not get all of the features of XLSecurity. So, for example, we talked about the ability to lock a user out from their password after failed attempts. You're unable to do that unless you're using Windows infrastructure to create some additional policies. So the XLSecurity Screensaver, the Launchpad, the desktop restrictions, you lose all of that when you resort to the Windows login option. Alright, so the last piece, if we go to the Launchpad again, and let's go to Local Security Setup Wizard. going to select the custom option, and basically this screen here contains a list of functions that each of those schemes employ. So if you are interested in employing a particular scheme, but you want to kind of override one of the restrictions, you can go into this window here. So right now, the scheme that I've got set up is enabling role-based credentials with secure access. So under that scheme, these are the settings right now. So it enables inactivity on the lockdown. There's a screensavers enabled. We've got all these things. Synchronize with every new login. If you want, you can synchronize with a new user login no more often than once every 5 minutes, and so forth. So there are a few options here that where you can override a particular aspect of a scheme. I want to draw your attention to two things here. So first of all, if you recall the earlier diagram where we specify the central security server, this basically identifies which machine is designated as a security server. In my case, it's just my local machine. The Audit Services tells us basically where the file is located. So right now the audit path is CXLTech Audit. So if I open up Explore and I navigate to CXLTech Audit, you'll see, and I'm just going to sort this by date, a series of log files. If I double click on the log file, it's an XML file, and here you will see a log, and I'm just going to scroll down to the last activities. You'll see a log, and it indicates the username, the time, and it provides you with a brief description of what the person was doing or what module they were accessing. Alright, so here it tells me that Joe Black was changing the security configuration. There was an unsuccessful login attempt by Joe Black at this time. Alright, Craig Ferguson was accessing patient information. Craig Ferguson attempted to access patient information, and he was authorized to do it. Craig Ferguson attempted to configure the system settings, but he was denied access. Alright, so I'm not going to go into all of these, but this is worth having a look at just to get an idea of the types of functions that are maintained and recorded. Alright, so again, the log file provides you with an indication of the users who were logged on, what major functions they were involved with or attempting to do, and it gives you an idea of even tells you the study file that they were accessing. Okay? Alright. The intent today was to provide you at least with an introduction, an idea of how to set up security, and I focused on probably the most popular one that I see used, which is this one here. And I see a combination of people disabling the desktop and start button and those that want it accessible. We could have spent more time on this, but again I decided to, in the interest of time, to focus on what I felt was probably the most popular one. Thank you very much, everyone. Thanks for your questions. Thanks for participating. Have a great day and have a great week. Bye for now.